Welcome to Consultervation Season 2. It's been a while since I've been on the show. Delighted to be back. I'm here with two esteemed guests today on Season 2. And today we are talking about a super subject, the power of shared thinking. And in light of that, bring it back to the show, Mr. Turnbull. Kevin, good to have you here, my friend.
It's good to be here, Dave. Thanks for the invite.
My pleasure. And this whole thing about shared thinking, I had this idea, right? That the best way to talk about shared thinking is to talk to somebody who might work at a think tank. So we're not talking, Kevin, about a think tank, are we, in the spirit of Napoleon Hill and mastermind groups and like-minded people being in a room either virtually or in the same place. We're talking about a real think tank. Would you agree?
I would. I'm fascinated by the whole idea of shared thinking because, in a way, it's kind of at the heart of what we do as coaches. You know, we're often sounding boards. We initiate discussions and argument, maybe, and that's all about getting shared thinking and often shared consensus.
I think, sorry, Kevin, I think Debbie wants to be part of the show. So, and it's really great that she's calling in already. I mean, it's fabulous. So she's trying again. Let's be real people. Hold on. Hi, Debbie. I'm live on Consultervation. See you later. Bye. You talk about shared thinking. There's apparently potatoes and onion in the Arga. So, I mean, that is an issue, Lisa, isn't it? And we'll introduce you properly in a second, of international meritocracy. I will dash there in a moment. Now,
food security is a very important thing.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a disaster. So, Lisa, glad to have you with us. Talk us through this rather wonderful job title that you have.
Well, my job title is Managing Director of Professional Services at Chatham House, which is also known as the Royal Institute of International Affairs. We're quite famous for having a rule. Many people say the Chatham House rules, which they simply mean is a byword for a private conversation, but actually there is only one rule at Chatham House, and that is the rule that we all know and love.
Oh, I love it, and we should explore that a little bit. Kevin, had you heard of the Chatham House rule before?
I have, yeah. You see it quite frequently, and I've actually been to Chatham House on a number of occasions. Quite a few years back, I think, when I was director of Inchcape, I went to some events there, and you know, it's got to be said that Chatham House stick by the Chatham House rules. You know, it's kind of what they live by, and the consistency is fantastic.
And do you think, Lisa, it's something that organisations can learn from when they're making major strategic decisions?
In terms of using the Chatham House rule?
Yeah.
Well, the purpose of the Chatham House rule was really to encourage open and confidential dialogue. So the purpose of being able to share things and not reveal who, you know, not attribute the ownership of that particular piece of information. So I think there are areas where there are issues which are so difficult and so challenging that you might well need to have a position of safety where you can have those kind of frank and open dialogues. I wouldn't generally use it in a strategic context for ELTs or senior leadership teams. I think you should be able to have, you know, open dialogue and, you know, on the table kind of dialogue with your co-workers and those on the executive leadership team. But I think there's definitely elements of that which other organisations pull into play. So, you know, anonymous surveys, for example, and various other bits and pieces. So I think there are mechanisms that businesses definitely use to their advantage to create those positions and areas of open dialogue within organisations. So yeah, I think it does have a really important place.
It's good to clarify for anyone who hasn't heard of it. And I love this whole idea of having a safe place where people can genuinely talk about, you know, what they know is going on, but without necessarily having to break confidences or in many cases in large companies, swear allegiance to one person or another in the act of sharing information, as opposed to leaning in and brutally accepting there's a problem to be confronted. So what's your view on shared thinking? How important would you say, Lisa, it is?
I think it's vital in an organisation that, like Chatham House, which is trying to help, governments, societies, the population at large, or the informed public, as we sometimes refer to them, to try and understand some of the most complex problems that are facing the world today, either be those topical or regional issues. And we just couldn't do it without it. It's as simple as that. And very often if you're dealing with topics, for example, let's take climate change, for example, you also need a regional aspect of that, and you need to understand both sides of those coins. So, work in our environmental program, they would be, trying to work out, okay, how do we make the Sustainable Development Goals a reality? What are the kind of mechanisms and policies that that governments need to put into place in order to be able to achieve that? And then our Asia program will be going, okay, that's fine, but how did China think about that? How do we get China on board with those kinds of things? And bearing in mind their economy, and bearing in mind their regional goals as a country. So you kind of have to do a lot of that shared multidisciplinary thinking in order to be able to do that. And I think one of the more, the interesting thing about seeing Chatham House, and we just celebrated our centenary, which one of the interesting things I think has developed over time is the changing role of think tanks in society. So before, 60, 70 years ago, the image of a think tank was, predominantly white gentlemen in tweed, smoking a pipe, pontificating, thinking, researching, and then just sort of putting it out into a library that nobody will ever read. And the great power of think tanks, I think, in the 21st century is really about multidisciplinary thinking and trying to make the very complex manageable. Because if I think of what we're trying to do, certainly in our second centenary, it's to make those the biggest and most wicked problems of our day more manageable. We can't make them simple. I think that's a fallacy that we tell ourselves. But I do think we can make them manageable and create pragmatic solutions for governments and actors and societies in order to be able to help solve some of these problems.
Kevin, short saying, wow, it's a great reframe or reuse, isn't it, of a historic set of tools. Mr. Chairman, what do you think? I was going to put a banner up.
Well, I think the whole kind of think tank and Chatham houses it's a mechanism to to think the unthinkable, to debate the undebatable. And with your analogy there, Lisa, about climate change, it wasn't really that long ago where people were saying, well, there's no point in debating it because it's too expensive, or it's not happening, or it's a myth, or whatever it is. But the think tank format allows you to debate that undebatable, and saying, well, yes, it may be too expensive, but let's talk about how expensive it could be. Let's take it into bite-sized chunks. Let's eat the elephant one bite at a time. That sort of stuff. And I think that's terrific.
I do, and also I think you've explained a really complex example that you were talking about the power of multidisciplinary thinking. At RLC, we're always talking about perceptual positioning and at least considering three or more perspectives. But actually, we're talking much deeper than that, aren't we? We're talking about whatever. If there's 11 perspectives, think about them all. If there's 27, think about them all. It's no longer starting with 3+. It's as many as is required, is what I get a sense of.
Absolutely. And so an example of that is, so I was talking to a researcher today, and our director at the Middle East and North Africa program, Nina Khatib, and we were talking about that. I was explaining that I was coming on this podcast, and I've been asked this interesting question. So how to put some flavour to it. And she gave me a really good example. So one of the things that we do at Chatham House is really break down some of the really complicated problems that potentially governments, societies, actors, people who are trying to change the world are thinking about it in one particular dimension, and they're thinking about it quite simplistically, or trying to think about it quite simplistically, or have a particular fairly narrow framework. So an example would be what we call conflict supply chain. And what we did in the Middle East and North Africa program is we thought about, and I say we with great pride, I had absolutely nothing to do with it, but they thought about the conflict economy and how that interlinks with different regions. So it's not just about, Iraq, it's not just about Libya, it's not just about Yemen, it's not just about Syria. What are the commonalities of war? And let's think about it as an economic transaction. And whether we like it or not, some of the governments, some of the actors and groups, they're all transacting with each other, very often for illicit business, but not always. And so if you look at it as a supply chain, then you can actually take a more complicated framework and start to use those as opportunities to think about solving the conflict in a different way, rather than we've got conflict in Libya, we've got conflict in Yemen, we've got conflict in Syria, we've got conflict in Iraq. By looking at the conflict as a whole and the commonalities around that conflict, you then can have regional policies that you can layer on top in order to be able to affect change much more effectively than just purely there are good guys and bad guys in Libya, there are good guys and bad guys in Yemen, etc., etc. So that's the kind of breaking down and pragmatic solution finding that we're trying to do for governments and organisations that are trying to solve some of these really challenging problems.
I love it. That's a really great example to anybody listening about how to really step to one side and take a look at whatever your current problem is from a completely different view. A commercial model that's quite similar is, I always was amazed by the brand Warburton's when, to control the bread market, they invested in the side view that you just talked about and traced everything back to the point the seed is planted. Yeah. And started to purchase assets involved in the process to control, not necessarily control market conditions, but to control their risk in them. Now, whilst that's a very simple analogy compared to the complex one that you shared, Lisa, it's a good example of the business thinking in international affairs to solve a completely different problem by pulling pieces out and putting them back in. And I absolutely love that example, because most of us will never get to understand what a conflict economy is, which I'm sure we're all really grateful for, right? But it, like you've highlighted, it is in play, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in addition to that, I would say that part of being a think tank is also being a great communicator. You have to be able to write effectively. You have to be able to explain those complex ideas in different ways. And we're doing that, and then bringing in different voices as well. So we do that we've got a project called Common Futures, which is bringing young people together, thinking about across multiple continents, to think about some of these political problems that young people particularly, generally don't feel that they have any kind of voice in, don't feel that they have any mechanism for discussing those, or trying to be part of the solution of those. So Common Futures is really bringing those across a digital platform to bring those young people together to say, actually, they do have something to say. They are thinking about these in quite a political, quite a sophisticated way. And how can we link those to the research at Chatham House, or the thinking at Chatham House, in order to be able to come up with something, quite interesting that we can then feed back to governments and other organisations.
I love this conversation, Kevin. Just to capture some of those things Lisa just shared alone, right? About being a good communicator, a good writer, a good voice, using a system, using platforms, and actually thinking about the next generation and every generation, wherever they are, as in they all have a right to learn the lessons that the think tank is getting breakthroughs in or small progress in. I think that's it's almost a really noble cause of using thinking for an absolute maximum effect. So Lisa, how did you end up at Chatham?
Oh, well, so full confession, I had only ever heard of the Chatham House rule.
Okay.
And I made the same faux pas that absolutely everybody does, and said the Chatham House rules. And a job came up that I saw, and I said, Chatham House, I've heard of that. What is that? And I looked, and on the front of the website, and it's a little bit further down, but it's still there today, was essentially about changing the world.
Okay.
And I'm going to be tested for our
That's we'll come back to Lisa in a second. Kevin, what do you think of the conversation so far?
Well, I love that whole conflict economy discussion, because it makes you think more.
It does.
You know, just using that as a key to open the door, you start to think about what are the motivation behind all of these players and actors in these conflict worlds. You know, from the great unwashed population to the great unwashed leaders, sort of thing. So it makes you think and delve and probe, and you know, to get under the skin of it all. And I think that sort of analysis, you know, which is kind of completely prompted by what think tanks like Chatham House do, is fantastic. And I love what Lisa was saying there. She saw a job description about changing the world, and hey, you know, we're looking for world changes. I would volunteer for that.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? About sometimes when we're recruiting, and Lisa will be back with us in 2 seconds. I've got her here in the waiting room. Sometimes we'll be advertising for something, won't we? And or companies or clients of ours will, and they're advertising in such a normal way. You just are in the soup. You can't be identified. But that whole thing about, like you said, changing the world got our attention, and seamlessly. We will come back to that point, Lisa.
I'm so sorry about that. The modern technology, you know, the joys of modern technology. I don't know where you lost me or where I got lost. So fill me back in. Sorry about that.
Kevin was reciting back beautifully. The power of changing the world got your attention in a job ad.
Yes, that's right. So, you know, creating a sustainable, prosperous, and just world. I was like, sold. That's it. I'm coming. I'm here. So I applied, and I got the job. The point at which I applied, it was a HR director position, and it was the first time that Chatham House had really had a full-time professional HR director. So it was really about building the function from the ground up initially. Yeah. And once I'd done that for about sort of 3 years, the COO retired, and at back end of 2019, and I took over then as managing. We did a sort of a restructure, and I took over then as part of that restructure, and took on board IT. I'd already got HR, but I took on the library, facilities, and then subsequently digital transformation. But from my part, the purpose of, or the raison d'etre of professional services is really about creating a great environment in which the staff can actually live their best, I would say live their best life. That sounds really millennial, doesn't it? But really thrive and do their best work. That's what we're trying to achieve.
I love it. And it really connects well with our brand about, you know, helping businesses become best version businesses, and therefore applying loads of positive assumptions. That includes every part of it. And we all know that people are one of the critical pieces of that. Yeah, I find that it's really interesting, because the amount of human beings, talk about multidisciplinary humans, who all know they should be better on the inside, wrestle with it because it's natural and normal. And yet organizations are often slow to realize if you can enable that battle to be a winning battle, the rest takes care of itself, doesn't it, Kevin? And yet, you know, if I'd learned that years ago, you know, when I was in my corporate days, it'd have been a much more successful time. But I like that, an environment where people can be their best. It's a really simple message. And how have you managed and navigated, you know, we've talked about the pandemic so many different ways over the last 2 years.
I'm sure,
but,
yeah.
But how did Chatham House get through that?
Do you know what? I mean, we've heard from our external stakeholders. I think the vast majority of organisations essentially took to it like a duck to water. You know, we basically turned things around. We were a very in-person business up to that point. So yes, we had researchers that worked, you know, could work in the field and can work offline and work from home. And again, I think as a lot of businesses, we were just used to coming in every single day, whether we really needed to or not. We never really questioned it. We just came to the building, etc., etc. But we did do an awful lot of in-person business, convening and meetings, etc. And to be fair to both my team and to the credit of everybody at Chatham House, we flipped that around in 4 days. You know, we were running, I think we ran our first conference within 4 days of lockdown, and you know, we had to learn and do it and all at the same time and at top speed. So it was really good in the sense that we got a lot of flexibility. I think we all, you know, worked really hard over that period of time, but it was an exhausting period of time. There's no two ways about it. You know, lockdowns, etc. I'm sure other organisations that you've spoken to, everybody was in wildly different circumstances. We had some members of staff that had come over from another country, you know, were in temporary accommodation, were having to move in the middle of temporary, you know, having temporary accommodation, poor setups, younger people cramped into, you know, small, you know, apartments, you know, can't leave their room. And, you know, it was just really, when you really got into the detail of it, you know, there were different challenges and struggles that we had. I think from an organisational perspective, as we're coming out, one of the things that we're thinking about is what we've proven is that we can do the vast majority online, but what we can't do as effectively is things like convening. There are just, we can do online convening to a certain point, and I think the whole world is working out, okay, what online convening is really, really good and what online convening is, you know, okay, but not great. So from my personal perspective, and I'm just speaking from my side rather than a sort of more Chatham House side, I find that anything that's networking related online is just like, it's like a bad day. It just doesn't feel right to me. You just don't get you know, another Zoom chat room and stuff. You know, I can do it, but it's just not as good as being in a room with somebody and seeing, you know, just seeing the feel of the room, seeing who's there, seeing who's talking, etc. But I find learning conferences and learning meetings, they're absolutely fine to do online. And actually sometimes the dialogue that you get online, because more people feel that they're capable of asking questions, they don't have to stand up in the middle of an audience, can be it can be really quite interesting that way. And we've certainly found that actually with events that we've run with younger people, or when we've been doing outreach events, we do summer school, etc. Some of the questions that like 16-year-olds were asking on our summer school, I was like, oh my God, I would have literally have never thought of that. How are these people, how are these children asking these intelligent questions?
Aren't they generally so well prepared these days?
It's like, what?
It's extraordinary.
I was looking at some of these questions. I'm not even sure I know what that means. I'm so sorry. But no, it was really great to see their interaction, so prepared and stuff. So I think what we are really coming to, as opposed to what I hope is a creation of, I don't think there's going to be a normal. I think normal is what you label things later. But in this transition phase, I think we're coming to value what is it that we really need to do in person. And it's probably the more difficult meetings, the more difficult diplomacy, some of those Chatham House rule conversations. I think people are missing those, and bringing people together in a room and really being able to see the whole person, the whole face, the body language, and be able to interact in that way. I think that's really important. And then you know, this hybrid way of working, how we're going to blend the two things together so that everybody gets a good experience. And you know, there's a lot of worry about, oh well, will it all be about going in person, and those people who go in person they'll inevitably climb up the ladder quicker than those who won't, and etc. And I think that's really hard to say. I think that's going to require really good conscious leadership and management from all parties, really. But that's the thing that I'm thinking about, is how do we do conscious leadership and management so that we don't have this inequity of those staff who need to work predominantly digitally or online, and those staff who choose to come in person, etc. There shouldn't be a huge disparity amongst those two. We should be able to blend those.
Isn't it alarming? As brilliant as that question is, isn't it alarming to think about unconscious leaders? Leaders who are sleeping at the wheel, Kevin, eh?
Well, I think we've met a few of those in our time.
That would be true. But I love that whole thing. And I know you said conscious, but it's almost as though you meant a blend of conscious and conscience, where people are just in tune, aren't they? They're in tune with this. Because I agree with you. It's too easy to think about some of the cliches of 2 years ago, which have been around for decades, which is people being measured successfully by the fact they're in early, the fact they leave late, and therefore no one's really asking, was their work effective? Do they really need to work all those hours? And there's one thing that sticks with me, even at this stage, is it's a simple thing that if people at work for you have discovered that their life is valuable, their time away from work is valuable, whether it's forced or not, and they want to keep a part of that, they'll stay with your organization if you can blend it well and give them the chance to enjoy their life, rather than this movie that we all subscribe to. We joked before we went live today about being in the Matrix, and where you work however many years, you get to retirement, your body starts to let you down a little bit, hopefully not much, but it can be disastrous. And then before you know it, the time of your life you were looking forward to is over. I think we do live in an age where you can have your cake and eat it within reason. And if employers can work that out, Lisa, they can transform, can't they, their whole workforce appetite and do things just in a different way. So I want to talk to you about you for a little bit. And this is where I'm going to open up any question Kevin wants to ask you too. But I'd like to know what lights you up outside of Chatham House in your own time. What is it that, captures your imagination?
Well, loads of things really. You asked me that question the other day, and I gave a really sort of monotonous answer that I thought was appropriate, which is some stuff around enjoying leadership, which is not that that's not true. I suppose what lights me up is having a laugh with friends, gardening. That sounds really boring, doesn't it? I'm about to go down a rabbit hole of sounding terribly boring, but just the beauty of nature and things like that.
Are we not making a huge assumption together here about those things? I mean, I must tell you, living in East Sheehan Farm, we have a tree outside. There are loads of trees outside, but there's a tree right next to one of the conservatories, and it's the most alive tree I've ever seen in my life. There's about 60 to 70 birds all day long feeding off it, and I think. I hope this is true, Kevin, because you're so young, you might be able to tell me, right? It's I think it's true. You do appreciate forms of life, whatever they are, the older you get. So maybe it isn't as boring as you were implying.
I think that's true, so I suppose to be specific, nature lights me up. I can, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but my father passed away last year, and he was in Dorney, and it was the first time I'd ever been to Dorney. And you might know that neck of the woods, Dave, but it's the most staggering. It was when you see scenery. He always used to say, "It's breathtaking up here," and I've never really seen scenery that's breathtaking. I've seen it nice, and beaches are nice, and all the rest of it, but it's not until you walk amongst, trees that are 100 feet in the air, and or you can see out into the landscape a beautiful loch, and it was truly breathtaking. It was truly magical, and I understood for the first time what he meant by it's breathtaking. So I think what I've learned is that what lights me up is actually nature, to be perfectly honest.
And I really love your description, and I can concur that there are parts of Scotland, and we live in a big chunk of it that's like this, where often my eyes don't know what to do. You're going along and you're like, Mallorca was very similar with the microclimates, where you're going into a microclimate, you've never seen it before, and you're going, what is this? And your eyes are processing so much information, but it's just nice. You end up with a mild face ache because this is just beautiful. And it is, I think it's very undervalued in Britain. And there are parts of England that are similar. But we have it up here on steroids. Some extraordinary places, primarily because they're unspoilt. There aren't many people living in them. They're owned by big estates. They're looked after. And they're just sensational. I love that. Kev, do you have a question for Lisa?
Well, can I just build on what you're saying there? Because I think there's a really positive mental health aspect to all of that scenery, sunshine, and nature. I deliberately did a little kind of own time RVing earlier this year, and I went to the national parks in Utah.
Nice.
And honestly, every day there was a kind of, oh my God moment.
Yeah.
And it was just staggering. And, I felt a little bit burned out, before I was going, but I thought I'm going to do this because I really want to go, and I want to see these beautiful sights in the Arches, and I went to the Grand Canyon at the end of it. And it was just staggering. And you just felt that you were kind of coming alive because you were seeing the world and nature in a different sort of a way. And of course, it's so epic, it's such a grand scale of it all, that you couldn't help but think that sky is huge.
Yeah.
Those rock formations are unbelievably complicated. And it was amazing. It was amazing.
We had Dr. Lee Valence on the show a few episodes ago, Lisa, who's the CEO of a hospice. She grew up wanting to be a CEO of a hospice. I mean, that tells you all you need to know about how mad she is. But she's a change maker. But she talked about to our team once about the power of a outdoor area, views out of a window for the people that stay with her, for whatever condition they're in, that they get to see nature. And what a demonstrable effect it has on people towards the end. So I think it's a huge thing, isn't it, Kevin? It's way undervalued.
Not only that, Dave. If you take the kind of the norm of being in a corporate world in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the office space was terrible. Many people couldn't see out of windows. It was enclosed. It was corridor-like.
Right,
It was just awful. I joined Ford Motor Company as my first job after university, and the air conditioning didn't work that well, so people were getting sick. And if you look back and you think that can't possibly have happened, but it did.
Yeah.
I'm not sure things have changed hugely since then.
That's true.
It was really funny. So I'm well known for being a bit of a plantaholic at work, and before the lockdown, the whole wall behind me would have been covered in plants, but I had to take them all home before they died during the pandemic. But one of the key things, there are a few very small things that I did, and not really deliberately, through sort of requests from staff. They knew I liked plants, and so they said, "Lisa, will you get some plants for the office? Can we have proper plants for the office?" I was like, "Yeah, that's absolutely fine, of course, no problem." So we did, and they loved them. They absolutely loved the plants, and now I'm the plant lady that they ask for, and like, "Well, can we have a plant here? Can we have a plant there?" Yes, of course, yeah, no problem. But I'm really wondering what, and it's one of the things that I'm thinking about next, is what spaces are we going to need when people want to return to the office? Because you're quite right, Kevin. No one's going to want to be in one of those soulless offices where you've got a few little pictures, sad, dusty pictures of your loved ones pinned to a bit of a sort of a cork board in front of you, and a sea of empty desks. No one's going to want that. So what spaces are going to be required for the kind of work that we're going to want to do in person in the office? And I think we really need to rethink and redesign our spaces, because I don't think to your point, they weren't made for the human spirit. They weren't made for humans to thrive.
And it's interesting. We were at a conference recently, very recently actually, and the horticulturist guy who's on, I don't watch it, but Good Morning Britain and whatever it's called these days. And he's also on a show with a few other people he wanted to names drop, but he's been around for a decade. That works with Charlie and the Garden and all that kind of stuff. He's just put a book out, and he did a demonstration for a talk for about 50 minutes about the effect of horticulture in the office. And initially, you hear of a subject like that, Kevin, right? Oh, sorry, you might. I did. Going, all right. Not because I'm a skeptic, because I wrongly associated plants to it. Going, really, But he was brilliant. And by the end of his talk, I'm going, Debbie, you're right. Let's get more plants, And when our things we're fixing up here are done, I want to see loads of plants around the place because I now understand the massive effect they have on someone's health and well-being. Massively.
Right. Nature is the new cubicle.
Nature is the new cubicle. I love that. That's excellent. We're going to steal that one.
Steal away,
it's given freely.
Now then, we also have here MD of Professional Services at Chatham House, Royal Institute of International Affairs, and Plant Pro.
I think the pro is probably a little bit undeserved.
Well, I was upgrading it. I didn't want to be gender, specific because it'd be unfair. Right, lady. That's
fair. Well, I don't mind.
Professional, I think, is people are asking you for advice. So, Lisa, another question. This conversation's flying by. What are you most proud of?
Oh, well, I think we sort of talked about this before, but in my professional life here at Chatham House, I think one of the things that I've been really pleased by is our approach to EDI. And when I first got here, I'm going to be completely honest, there was very little equality and diversity work going on. It's not that people didn't care about it. It's not that staff didn't care about it. It was just there was no forum for it. That was it. And we went from that to working with the Inclusive Top 50. And we became a member of the Inclusive Top 50 the first year we entered, and we've climbed the ranks ever since. We've been ranked 3 years in a row. We're now EDI, not Edinburgh Airport. We are now we're now number 38.
Confuse people, Lisa.
Fair enough.
Google Flights, that's what it is. Go ahead.
So we're now number 38, and we're working on it. It's a work in progress. And since last year, we've also created an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion board, a staff board, which will report into our board of trustees. And we're doing really important work and really great work around our equality, diversity and inclusion, taking a really hard look at ourselves, being proud of what we've achieved so far, but not resting on that and seeing as tick box exercises and saying, right, great, job done. So I'm really proud of being part of that, just that nudge, that little nudge initially from starting, work on equality, diversity and inclusion, and getting us into visibility like, the Inclusive Top 50, great organisation to work with and partner with. And then, from there, catalysing it again, and then working to create to just provide the environment where an equality and diversity and inclusion board, staff board, can be created. And so I attend, and it's just really heartwarming to see the work that we're doing on that, and the work that the staff are doing on that. So that's one of the proudest moments, taking an organisation that was kind of, it just was nowhere to be seen, through to being very present and being very core to what we do.
That's brilliant. Kevin, do you have a final question for Lisa today? And I'll ask her one more in a moment.
I don't think I do. And that EDI stuff, I think, is great. I do think a lot of people look at it with a kind of, really? Are we doing more of this stuff? I've already got EDI, and they clearly haven't. So it's a thing that needs repeated a lot. And I like your whole idea of, in fact, you're the only person that's ever guested, Lisa, that's enabled me to get in nudge theory on the table in one of these podcasts.
I love nudge theory,
and I think nudging is a great thing. The whole idea that it's completely deliberate that your recycling bin is bigger than your waste bin, because that's a nudge to say that you should be recycling more. And the more you can do that for all sorts of issues, it can make a lasting impression. So thank you for allowing me to bring in nudge theory to this conversation.
You're welcome. And it's a great thing. And it's actually, in my view, I think it's one of the key ways in which you can really improve inclusion. People think it's just so big, or it's equality and diversity. It's, it can get muddled very, very quickly. But actually, those small individual decisions have a really big effect. over time, and just little tiny behavioural changes will really help improve that. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
I mean, that was very good and very stout. I did warn you about his earlier on. You're still using it right here at the end of the episode. And for anybody listening and watching today, we are running over, but this conversation's been far too rich to pause or hold back from. Lisa, is there a lasting message or imprint you want anyone listening to remember from our chat today that that really connects with you, that you want to say, no, just do this? Is there something you'd like to leave as a final thought?
Now you've really put me on the spot. I suppose one of the things that I would say is we should just, I think we need to accept that the problems some of the problems, organizational problems that we face, the right person in the right role, and then step back and relax and all the rest of it, that's great, and that's actually right. The problem is we've been sold that is simple, and it's not simple. It takes effort, it takes work, it takes conscious leadership. So stop looking for the simple. Stop looking for the quick fix. Stop looking for good guys and bad guys and thinking that these problems are very easy to solve. Because I think we've been sold that in our political lives, and in some of the political problems, there's good guys, there's bad guys, lock them up, build a wall, take back control. These things are not simple. They're really complex problems. And maybe by taking a different look and making a conscious effort and conscious leadership, we can actually find a way to solve and overcome some of these problems. But don't be lulled by simple. Take complex and manage it.
I love that. Take complex and manage it. I mean, wow, what a way to finish, Lisa. And I've done my very best to take bits of what you said. And if you're listening to this, I don't know what the zero is about, but it's because it's a plant symbol, apparently. Just quickly came up on my support panel. But I love that idea that let's accept we've been sold a bit of an untrue story, but only a true principle, and that the real effort comes into being prepared to pick apart a complex process, go right back to the beginning, use multidisciplinary thinking. Take that conflict economy example from earlier in the episode and really think about your business through that lens, because I think it's a tremendous tip alone on its own merits today. Clearly the dog was highly motivated. You see Monty leave, then it's getting a bit heavy, Dave. He's back. So Lisa, we want to both thank you for your time and
pleasure.
Being prepared to spend time with us. I know what we haven't spoken about how you met RLC, and we'll maybe do that another time. And Debbie and I are working together with your fellows and stuff we've done down there together.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
some of the funny and brilliant moments. But this has been Consultervation, where professionals from around the world, consultants, advisors, plant pros even, get together to talk about issues in business today. And we've been with Kevin Turnbull. Kevin, thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure, Dave. That was a fascinating conversation about complex issues not made easy.
So today we have been talking with Managing Director of Professional Services to Chatham House, Royal Institute of International Affairs and Plant Pro, Lisa O'Daly.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great to chat to you guys. It's been really good. Thank you so much.
And wherever you are, have a think about how you, whatever you're doing, can help change the world, creating a just and sustainable future. And if you heard that last section about EDI, place it at the top of your list. You heard about Chatham House. They appointed an Equality and Diversity and Inclusion Board reporting to the trustees of the organisation. What a bold, simple idea. And let's all remember from Kevin's URA moment, using the nudge theory, tiny nudges of moving something along and continuing your commitment to education of critical issues in business today is the only way to solve long-term complex problems. This has been Consultervation. I've been Dave Evans. See you on the next episode.